Former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney has accused the government of undercutting the UK's key economic institutions. Mr. Carney told the BBC the government's tax-cutting measures were working at some cross-purposes with the bank. He also pointed to a decision not to publish economic forecasts by the Office for Budget Responsibility, OBR, alongside Friday's mini-budget. The mini-budget sparked turmoil in financial markets and hit the pound. Investors had been demanding a much higher return for investing in government bonds, causing some to halve in value. Pension funds, which invest in bonds, were forced to start selling, sparking fears of a fresh market downturn. The Bank of England was forced to step into calm markets and on Wednesday said it would buy £65 billion of government bonds over the next fortnight in an attempt to restore stability. Welcome to Savvy Economist. After the recent news on how the UK new PM tax cuts had led to the fall in the pound, today we hear the former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney accuse the government of undercutting key economic institutions. As we go into the video, don't forget to like the video, subscribe and turn on the notification. Liz Truss has insisted her government's economic policy is on the right course despite the need for emergency intervention from the Bank of England, saying she is prepared to take difficult decisions and will not change policy. In a round of interviews with BBC local radio stations, her first public statement since warnings from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the bank's intervention to prevent a run on pension funds, the Prime Minister said people would feel the benefits in the longer term. "This is the right plan that we have set out," Truss told BBC Radio Norfolk. "Of course, there will always be people who will oppose particular measures. And it's not necessarily easy. But we have to do it." Pressed repeatedly by the presenters about why her government had cut taxes primarily for richer people in Friday's mini-budget despite inflationary pressures, prompting a decline in the pound and a rise in the cost of government debt, Truss rejected any idea of error. "Of course, some of these decisions are difficult," she told BBC Radio Lancashire. "Some people don't like them. But what I couldn't do is allow the situation to drift. So that is why my government has taken urgent action." The Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, claimed the round of local radio interviews had made this disastrous situation even worse as she urged the Prime Minister to recall Parliament to reverse what she described as Kwasi Kwarteng's budget last Friday. Her failure to answer questions about what will happen with people's pensions and mortgages will leave families across the country facing huge worry, she said. "It is disgraceful that the family finances of people across the country are being put on the line simply so the government can give huge unfunded tax cuts to the richest companies and those earning hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. This is a serious situation made in Downing Street and is the direct result of the Conservative government's reckless actions. If the Prime Minister continues to prioritize saving her face over saving people's homes, Tory MPs must join Labour in calling for Parliament to be recalled so this kamikaze budget can be reversed. Failure to do so will make them complicit in this reckless bout of economic self-harm." With several Tory MPs openly mutinous in the run-up to next week's Conservative Party conference in Birmingham, Truss tried to argue that the issues faced by the UK were little different to those of other countries. "This is a global problem," she told BBC Radio Kent. "But what is right is the UK government stepped in and acted at this difficult time. We've seen difficult markets around the world because of the very difficult international situation we face. And what our government has done is we've taken decisive action." Stressing that the biggest part of the mini-budget involved help for energy bills, Truss said the government had sought to both curb inflation and help set a better trajectory for the long term with growth and wages. She said, "Of course, that involves taking difficult decisions, and as Prime Minister, I'm prepared to take difficult decisions and do the right thing." There is increasing speculation that ministers could seek significant cuts to public spending to help balance the loss of revenue from tax cuts, which will disproportionately assist richer people. It is also possible that increases to benefits and pensions, which had been due to a rise in line with inflation, could be reduced. Chris Philp, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, attempted to play down the scale of the financial crisis in which the pound slumped on Monday. Asked by LBC Radio's Nick Ferrari, "This is a crisis, you accept that? Or was this all part of the plan on Friday?" Philp replied, "I don't accept the word crisis at all." Earlier in an interview with Sky News, Philp said departments would be expected to deliver public spending cuts. The efficiency and prioritization exercise is designed to first make sure we stick to those spending limits and secondly make sure that we are prioritizing expenditure, not on anything wasteful, but on things that deliver frontline public services and drive economic growth. We are going to stick rigidly to those spending limits because it is important to be financially responsible. Asked if he felt regret for the turmoil in the markets after Friday's fiscal statement, Philp said, "No one's perfect, but I'm not going to apologize for having a plan to grow the economy." The cost of government borrowing, however, edged higher and the interest paid, or yield, on 10-year government debt rose. Speaking to the BBC's Today program, Mr. Carney said that while the government was right to want to boost economic growth, there is a lag between today and when that growth might come. He said, "There was an undercutting of some of the institutions that underpin the overall approach, so not having an OBR forecast is much commented upon, and the government, I think, has accepted the need for that, but that was important." The OBR provides independent forecasts of the impact of the government's plans on the economy as well as on public finances. The Treasury decided not to publish its forecasts on Friday, which fueled market turmoil. Unfortunately, having a partial budget, in these circumstances, the tough global economy, tough financial market position, working at cross purposes with the bank has led to quite dramatic moves in financial markets, Mr. Carney said. The Treasury has subsequently said the OBR will release a full forecast when Mr. Courting announces his medium-term fiscal plan on November 23rd. Mr. Carney also said that the government's mini-budget showed it was working at some cross-purposes with the bank in terms of short-term support for the economy. Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng unveiled the country's biggest tax package in 50 years on Friday. But the £45 billion worth of tax cuts has sparked concerns that government borrowing could surge along with rising interest rates. The bank has a target to keep inflation at 2%. But prices are rising at their fastest rate in 4 decades, and the bank has been lifting interest rates to cool inflation. Since the mini-budget, some economists believe interest rates could rise faster and higher, to as much as 6% by next May. At the helm of the Bank of England until 2020, Mark Carney was charged with rebuilding the reputation of British financial systems after the crash of 2008. While it is not usual for former governors to comment on current issues, his stark words will be a further blow to the government as it defends its tax cuts. Mr. Carney has indicated that the fallout from these plans, by contributing to market turmoil, has consequences that may damage rather than enhance prosperity. The Bank of England has been forced to inject billions of pounds into bond markets. That is after a plunge in their value threatened the viability of the pensions funds that manage workers' retirement pots. During times such as the financial crisis to the pandemic, the Bank of England has, on occasion, provided emergency help to ease global shocks. Doing so to offset the consequences of domestic government policy is far rarer. With the markets remaining uneasy, analysts say an emergency interest rate hike can't be ruled out. Ms. Truss insisted that the government's plan was right. In her first remarks since Friday's announcement, Ms. Truss told the BBC, "Of course, there are elements of controversy, as there always are. But she said, this is the right plan that we've set out." On Wednesday, Treasury Minister Andrew Griffith said that every major country is dealing with the same issues as the UK, such as Russia's war with Ukraine and the effect on energy prices. But while Mr. Carney conceded that the global economy is going through some difficulties, he said that over the last week developments have centered around the UK and that recent financial turmoil was a response to the government's mini-budget. Mr. Carney was the governor of the Bank of England for almost 7 years, from July 2013 to March 2020. Before that, he led Canada's central bank for 5 years, where he is seen as having played a major role in helping the country avoid the worst effects of the 2008 global financial crisis. His successor as governor, Andrew Bailey, declined to comment on Thursday on whether the bank would make further interventions. Some economists, including former Deputy Governor Sir Charlie Bean, suggested that the bank's Monetary Policy Committee call an emergency meeting and raise interest rates before a scheduled meeting on November 3rd. Mr. Carney said it was important that the system functions, but added, "We're talking about an interest rate meeting 5 weeks from now, and it is important to see the persistence of the exchange rate moves. It is important to see what else the government does and take that into account." He added, "This is a robust system, this is a resilient system, it has had a big knock, but it will move forward." The bank is widely expected to raise interest rates before Mr. Carney announces his fiscal plan in late November. This should set out how the government intends to follow its own fiscal rules. The current fiscal rules state that debt should be falling as a share of the UK's gross domestic product, which is all the goods and services that the country produces, by 2024 to 25. The rules also dictate that by that same financial year, daily public spending should be balanced by revenues. But it is possible that Mr. Carney could set out his own rules in November, changing those drawn up by his predecessor Rishi Sunak in November 2021. Meanwhile, World Bank President David Malpass on Wednesday warned that it could take years for global energy production to diversify away from Russia after it invaded Ukraine. This would prolong the risk of stagflation, or a period of low growth and high inflation, he said. In a speech at Stanford University in California, Mr. Malpass said there was an increased likelihood of a recession in Europe. He said China's growth was slowing sharply and U.S. economic output had contracted in the first half of the year. Those developments would have grave consequences for developing countries, Mr. Malpass said, citing what he called consequential and worsening challenges facing development. Addressing the current perfect storm of rising interest rates, high inflation, and slowing growth required new macro and microeconomic approaches, Mr. Malpass said. He said these would include better targeted spending and messaged efforts to increase supplies. The next few weeks will be critical. Mohamed El-Arian, who once helped run the world's biggest bond fund and now advises Allianz, Alif, said that the central bank had bought some time but would need to act again quickly to restore stability. The Band-Aid may stop the bleeding, but the infection and the bleeding will get worse if they do not do more, he told CNN's Julia Chatterley. The Bank of England should announce an emergency rate hike of a full percentage point before its next scheduled meeting on November 3rd. The UK government should also postpone its tax cuts, El-Arian said. It is doable, the window is there, but if they wait too long, that window is going to close, he added. The UK government has previewed rolling announcements in the coming weeks about how it plans to change immigration policy and make it easier to build big infrastructure and energy projects to boost growth, culminating in a budget on November 23rd at which it has promised to publish a detailed plan for reducing debt over the medium term. One big problem identified by investors, former central bankers, and many leading economists are that her government only set out half a plan at best. It went ahead without an independent assessment from the country's budget watchdog of the assumptions underlying the £45 billion, $48 billion annual tax cuts and their longer-term impact on the economy. It fired the top Treasury civil servant earlier this month. Charlie Bean, former deputy governor at the Bank of England, told CNN Business that the government was guilty of really stupid decisions. His former boss at the bank, Mark Carney, accused the government of undercutting UK economic institutions, saying that it contributed to the big knock suffered by the country's financial system this week. This is an economic crisis. It is a crisis that can be addressed by policymakers if they choose to address it, he told the BBC. British newspapers have started to speculate that Truss will have to fire Carney, her close friend and political soulmate, if she wants to regain the political initiative and prevent her government's dire poll ratings from plunging even further. Every single problem we have now is self-inflicted. We look like reckless gamblers who only care about the people who can afford to lose the gamble, one former Conservative minister told CNN. But for now, she's trying to tough it out and cling to the Reaganite experiment. Raising, postponing, or abandoning tax cuts will be avoided by Truss at all costs, as such a reversal would be humiliating and could leave her looking like a lame duck prime minister, wrote Mujtaba Rahman and Jens Larsen at political risk consultancy Eurasia Group. The only alternative left to balance the books would be to slash government spending, and that would prove equally politically difficult as the country enters a recession with its public services under enormous strain and a restive workforce that has shown it's ready to strike in large numbers over pay. Trusts and courting are now facing a severe economic crisis as the world's financial markets wait for them to make policy changes that they and the Conservative Party will find unpalatable, the Eurasia analysts wrote. The foreign investors who keep the British economy solvent are left scratching their heads for another 8 weeks, leaving plenty of time for doubts to surface again about the UK government's commitment to responsible fiscal policymaking. The message of financial markets is that there is a limit to unfunded spending and unfunded tax cuts in this environment, and the price of those is much higher borrowing costs, Carney said. That leaves the Bank of England in a tight spot. A week ago, it was pressing the brakes on the economy to take the heat out of price increases, even as the government tried to juice growth. The task got even harder this week when it was forced to dust off its crisis playbook and bail out the government. It may not be long before it has to intervene again, this time with an emergency rate hike. Will the Bank of England keep raising interest rates further up to cleave inflation? If the necessary things are not done, this could become a full-blown problem for the government, and people would freeze in the cold or die of starvation this winter. Do you have plans to help you survive the coming bitter winter? You can share your ideas in the comment section. You may be helping someone out. Also, do not forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.